Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next hour we'll be talking about the tsunami of price rises that we all face from today. But, and it's a big but, we'll also be asking the experts what help is available and how you can help yourselves cope with the cost of living crisis. Get your questions to me at GBViews at gbnews.uk. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the GB News. Here's Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Alastair. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance later this month. Cabinet Minister Kit Malthouse told GB News the government's doing what it can to help those struggling.
Chancellor's moved to provide some assistance. £9 billion flowing through the council tax system. The national living wage rising by 6.6% today as well, to £9.50, which is £1,000 for every full-time worker on that wage. Obviously, we're increasing the national insurance threshold in July. That's another £330. And then the universal credit taper will give about 1.7 million families another £1,000 a year. So we are doing our best.
Specialist police officers have started to remove environmental activists blocking oil terminals across England. The group Just Stop Oil says hundreds of protesters have obstructed around 10 sites. It's calling on the government to stop funding new oil licences. Among those taken away by officers were 2 people who'd climbed on top of a tanker at an Esso depot in Birmingham. At least 6 arrests have been made so far. Several facilities have been forced to suspend operations as a result of the blockades. One protester spoke to GB News reporter Amelia Harper earlier. She says urgent action is needed.
Need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much, much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now, or our children will have no future.
To Ukraine, the Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Earlier, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said some progress had been made at peace talks. President Zelensky's office confirmed further negotiations are continuing today. Refugees fleeing Mariupol have described the devastation they've witnessed.
I was in Mariupol the whole time. We just slowly watched how the number of our homes was getting smaller every day. Everyone I know, they don't have a house right now. I also don't have a house, and all the belongings that I have with me, that's all I took out.
We waited for the negotiations so much for 2 or 3 days. But when we realised on March 22nd that we had food left for 2 days and we were drinking water only by 2 gulps, we decided to leave. But we were leaving under shelling. It was scary.
Well, the mayor of Kyiv says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the capital. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence says Ukraine's retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. However, the MOD added that Kyiv and Chernihiv have been subjected to continued missile strikes despite Russian claims of reduced activity. President Zelensky said Russian forces have been forced to change their tactics.
To the north of Kyiv, in the direction of Chernihiv, in the Sumy region, the occupiers are being pushed back. They are aware that they can no longer stand the intensity of hostilities they could have held in the first half of March. But we must also understand that for the Russian military, this is part of their tactics. All this is not that easy. We know their plans. We know that they are moving away from the areas where we are beating them to focus on others that are very important, on those where it can be difficult for us.
Volodymyr Zelensky there. Meanwhile, a Russian governor has accused Ukraine of attacking a fuel storage facility in the Russian city of Belgorod overnight. The official claims 2 military helicopters struck after crossing the border. Some areas of the city were evacuated. The claim's not yet been independently verified. And in other news, the government insists it will ban gay or bisexual conversion therapy, but not transgender. It comes just hours after the Prime Minister had said he'd drop the ban entirely. Boris Johnson said to have changed his mind after seeing the furious reaction from his original decision. The backlash followed the announcement that ministers were looking instead at ways of preventing conversion therapy through existing law. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today. That as another record number of people in the UK have had COVID. At the end of last week, an estimated 4.9 million people had it, up from 4.3 million the week before. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. Those considered to be high risk and some NHS and social care staff will still be eligible for free tests. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to On the Money with Alistair.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Coming up on the Money today, the cost of living crisis and beating the freeze. Well, the newspapers have certainly had a field day with the cost of living crisis. From the Mirror's April Cruel Day to The Sun, I love this one, Pain in the Gas, just above a picture of Vladimir Putin. And an interesting twist upon that one in the Financial Times. There's a story that we did on the programme yesterday, which is Joe Biden considering releasing quite a lot of oil from the US Reserve to try and ease prices down in the marketplace. So that's what the newspapers have to say. But today, we are going to take the front pages to one side and put you on the front page as we address the cost of living crisis and try to help you beat the squeeze in On the Money. Also in today's Money Talks, Michael Jacobs, Professorial Fellow at Sheffield Political Economy Research Institute. As a former economic advisor to the Labour Cabinet and Prime Minister Gordon Brown, Michael gives his take on the political climate surrounding this cost of living crisis. And do send in your financial concerns to us. Hopefully we can answer some of your questions. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk, or as a lot of you already have done, you can tweet @GBNews, or you can tweet me. So do stay with us. This is GB News and I'm Alistair Stewart and you're On the Money. So, welcome to On the Money on this, our special Beat the Squeeze Day. You might think the price of cucumbers trebling was an April Fool's story, but it isn't. It's just one of the slightly more exotic examples of the rising cost of living. Now, you can cope without cucumbers, unless, of course, you run the catering for your local cricket club, but other things are literally vital. Grabbing most of the headlines has been electricity. The price cap soars today by around 50% for most folk, meaning an average annual cost of some £2,000. That's more than 150 quid a month, more than 40 quid a week. I wonder if you were one of the millions going online to see if you could find a better deal yesterday. So many of you did that most of the big power companies' sites crashed. If you did it yesterday, well done, good move. Most broadband prices are going up today as well, or very soon, by around 10%. If you're tempted to drown your sorrows by going down the pub, be warned, the VAT rate on drinks goes back up to 20% today from 12.5%, as it does on restaurant food. Maybe you should just stay at home, the home on which council tax is now also rising by around 3.8%. And by the way, if you're in band A to D, you should get a bit back to help you with the electricity price rises, but it's not a lot, and most of it will have to be paid back. If you're in work, the best answer is probably to knuckle down and get on with it. Just don't think too hard about the 1.25% extra that you'll be paying on those wages in national insurance, as indeed will your boss. And if all of those bills get too big, do try to avoid following the growing herd who are putting even essentials on the plastic. The rates are already eye-watering, almost criminal. And they, like all interest rates, are only going one way, and that is up. In all my years as a reporter and a journalist, I have never known it this bad. So today we're going to try and help. I have a brilliant panel of guests, two of them already in the studio with me, others joining a little bit later on. And if there's a penny here or a pound there to be saved, we're on it. We're on the money. So let me introduce you to my first guest. Greg Marsh is the founder of Nous.co. It's a consumer platform aiming to help those in need through the cost of living crisis. And sitting right next to me here in the studio, a good friend of this programme and a good friend of mine, Jasmine Birtles, who is the founder of moneymagpie.com. And both of you are very, very welcome. I'm going to start with you, Jasmine, if I may. I mean, it is quite literally a tsunami of price rises, as I tried to detail in that monologue, and the Mirror does really rather well. But there is help out there. So let's start with the positive from moneymagpie.com's point of view. Money available from local and central government. How do folk make sure that they're not missing out? What is their entitlement? Not a handout, it's their entitlement.
Yeah, no, very good point. And I think there are a few things that you can do. Certainly, there are websites like, for example, Turn to Us, that's number 2, turntous.org.uk, and also Entitled To, which has a benefits calculator. So you can go in and you can put all your details, age, your income, etc., and it'll spit out the various benefits and tax credits that you are entitled to. And as you say, you're entitled to them. So it's a very good idea to use those just to make sure that you've got everything. Also, as you remember in the spring statement, that the Chancellor did say that one of the very few giveaways that we had was that he was giving an extra £500 million to local councils to offer to local people who needed an extra one-off. So I think it's a really good idea to go to your council and say, what have you got? Yeah. Because I am struggling.
And be prepared to offer up chapter and verse, because in that sense it is means tested. Just a small example. You've got to be an A to D to get the rebate on the electricity price.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. So on your council, exactly. So the council tax rebate is coming. That's coming anyway, which is helpful. But I think Yeah, they are probably going to make you go through a few hoops, as you say. It is means tested, but it's worth doing that. And if you are really struggling, I think now is the time to go to one of the free debt advice agencies, which are marvellous. I mean, they're very, very busy, but once they get round to you, they can certainly help deal with your creditors, they can help you budget, and they can also put you in touch with grants, actual free money out there.
OK, this is let's try and be helpful and not beat anybody up moment, Greg. Would you, with your Nous hat on, add anything to Magpie's list there? Are other things that folks should be looking for, seeking out?
Talk to the suppliers of your services if you're really struggling to pay. Energy companies don't want to cut households off. It costs them money, it's inhumane, and it causes all sorts of other challenges down the line. So if you really are struggling to meet bill payments, do speak to your suppliers. They can often arrange a payment plan with you. They may be able to defer some of those costs. The other thing I would say is this is the time to think about making a plan. Our anxiety at these moments is off the charts. The news headlines are really scaring many people up and down the country. The best way to deal with that is not to bury your head in the sand, and it's not to run around screaming, or at least not for long, but is to make a real plan that relates to your specific situation. So
a brilliant point, and I haven't written a question out on it, but I will now ad-lib one from the top of my head because it's such an important point. I mean, what we used to call in the old days a budget, where you do say, look, my electricity is now going to cost me X, and we've got a much clearer view now of what it will be, and you say, OK, I earn Y, and so this bit goes on electricity, that bit goes on food, that bit goes on rent or mortgage. I mean, it's literally an old-fashioned budget.
A lot of people, practically, I know I'm one of them, budget month to month by looking at what's in the bank account at the end of the month. And there's going to be a real shock coming at the end of April if that's the way you've been planning historically, because what you're going to see is that your outgoings are a lot higher, but your incomings probably haven't moved very much.
What are most people, and I'll come to you with exactly the same question after Greg's answered it. As far as Nous is concerned, you're an advisory site, people are in trouble, you try to help. What are the most common causes for them to get in touch with you? What are they shouting and even crying about?
Our service tries to help people form a picture of all of their household costs in one place. So really, what's energy going to cost you over the next 12 months? What's your council tax going to cost you? What's your broadband going to cost? Your car insurance, your home insurance? And then how do we think those costs, or how do we forecast that those costs are going to move for your specific household circumstance? The reason that matters is different households will experience this crisis in very different ways. People with a larger, older property will be seeing their energy bills really increase. People in city centres will be seeing a different cost of living effect.
The good work that both of you do, and this is a slight variation on the same question, Jasmine, for you, is evidence that there is an appetite for sites that help people and guide them. There's also an army out there like USwitch and people, Price Comparison, and our mutual friend Martin Lewis and so on. Are they up to muster?
Well,
because you mentioned broadband, and you can get so lost in the broadband price comparisons.
It's a very good point. And of course, the energy comparison sites are saying, hey, you know, we'd love to help, but there's not a huge...
That's why they all crashed yesterday.
Well, yeah, it's been very difficult for them. And of course, they make money by people switching. So it's been a really tough time for them. There is help out there. And I think it is worth people both going onto websites, obviously, you know, like mine. I mean, I would say that. But also there are some great apps, you know, like Nous. And there are other budgeting apps, and there are digital banks like Monzo Starling that will help you budget. I mean, as you say, budget is an awful word. If I could come up with a better one.
It's just good old-fashioned discipline of living within your means.
It is.
And I want to talk to both of you and Siobhan when she joins us later on towards the end of the programme. I said at the top, and I warn both of you that people out there who ask much better questions than I do have been inundating us. And you mentioned about get in touch with the supplier. Mark sent us this, whether it's an email or a tweet, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But anyway, here's what Mark had to say. It's a real cracker. Will we ever see energy prices return to an acceptable pre-2020-21 price? If not, then in your opinion, what do you expect the new norm will be from a tariff perspective?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I think there is a reasonable hope that once this war is over, and once we have more supply on stream from renewable sources and we're less dependent on Russian oil exports, for instance, that energy prices might come down. They might even come down to levels that they have been at historically. I don't think necessarily that energy is likely to be in the long run.
The international market is talking about $80 a barrel in a year and a half's time. That's the new average. That's higher than what we grew up with.
It's higher than what we grew up with, and everything's more expensive over time. My anxiety is less about the energy effects over time, but what will happen in the meantime to all the other costs and services in our lives, which unfortunately are even bigger in effect than just the cost of energy.
Superb start. We've more time to come later on, and thank you both very much indeed. We'll come back to you. We've got to warn you, lots more questions here as well. This is On the Money with me, Alistair Stewart, and my brilliant guests, Greg and Justine. After the break, I'll be joined by the Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, for her take on the cost of living crisis. So do stay with us. You're On the Money.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Alistair Stewart, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. People's purse strings will be pulled tighter from today as the cost of living crisis intensifies for many households. Energy bills are set to soar by over 50% as the price cap is raised, and a raft of tax rises also come into force. Our business and economics editor Liam Halligan has the details.
We're heading for the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, and Rishi Sunak's spring statement measures will do little to offset that drop. This cost of living squeeze has been months in the making. As we emerge from lockdown, global supply chains remained broken. Demand has surged, but our economy struggled to get into gear, causing prices to rise. Even before Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine, UK inflation was at a 30-year high. Now this conflict's stopping Russian and Ukrainian crops and energy exports reaching global markets, again causing prices to spiral. From today, April the 1st, household utility bills go up by 54% on average to almost £2,000 a year, with bills set to rise even further in the autumn. Also from today, council tax bills rise by 3% on average, although those in bands A to D are in line for a £150 rebate. From next week, national insurance contributions increase by 1.25 percentage points for employers and employees. That will cost basic rate taxpayers an extra £178 a year on average, while those on higher rate tax will pay, again on average, £715 more. As these higher bills and tax rises take hold, wheat, barley and fertiliser prices are also soaring, pushing up food and drink prices in the shops, restaurants and pubs. Petrol and diesel costs are also on the up, of course. It's now almost £100 to fill up a family car. And Sunak's spring statement fuel duty cut has been only partly passed on by retailers, with pump prices still rising. GB News has been highlighting inflation and the rising cost of living for months. But today's a day when the cost of living squeeze got significantly tighter.
My dear friend Liam Halligan there, and he'll be back later on in the programme with a brilliant interview with a former senior top advisor to Gordon Brown's government. It's now my great pleasure to be joined by someone I've known and admired for a very long time, Siobhan McDonough, who is the Labour Member of Parliament for Mitcham and Morden. But more importantly, in the context of what's going on today, she's also a member of the Treasury Select Committee. Great to see you, and thank you so much for coming in. Every MP that I talk to, whatever party they represent, says that their inbox, their mailbag is now full of cost of living crisis questions. What's the most common concern that you're getting from the good folk of Mitcham and Morden?
It's just a worry about how they pay their gas and their electricity bills. I knock on doors every Sunday morning, Alistair, and it's been coming down the track for 6-8 weeks, people expressing more and more anxiety about the increasing cost of living. And people who you wouldn't normally think would be caught by it, but are really. I mean, just before I came in, I saw an email from a lady, a pensioner, one-bedroom flat. This month, her water rates bill, which we rarely discuss, is going up from just under £10 a month to £16 a month.
The one thing that struck me when I was talking to Jasmine and Greg just before you joined us is, I said we've known each other for a long time, taking right back to when we first knew each other, as it were. It was Margaret Thatcher who talked about running a household like running a kitchen and keeping the cupboards stocked up and making little savings where you could. I mean, we are back to that kind of challenge, and they said it's budgeting. It's about sitting down with the family of a weekend and saying, look, we can afford that, we can't afford this at the moment.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the comments from the money-saving expert when a couple of weeks ago he said, I have no tips, no way to get people out of this. They're simply not going to be able to afford it, and the government needs to step in. That's why we were just so disappointed by the spring statement.
When you say the government needs to step in, again, something you and I have talked about in the past, and anyone of our political generation has talked about it, the government hasn't got any money to step in. You and I as taxpayers have money that they can choose to spend or choose not to spend. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is sitting on between 50 and 70 billion pounds, rather, that he's chosen right now not to spend. That's our money. There are many who say we should be getting it back directly rather than bailing out somebody else.
Well,
my point being, it's a political philosophy question as much as anything.
It is a political philosophy question. And at the Treasury Select Committee, I raised the point that why are you waiting till 2024 to reduce tax by 1p? Because how are people going to get to 2024? But there is also another thing, Alistair. We're finding that the gas companies out in the North Sea are making a huge amount of money. I mean,
do you know the most staggering number I saw in the spring statement was that because of the rising price of wholesale oil and gas, those companies out in the North Sea made an unexpected profit of £13 billion, which is exactly the amount that the Chancellor is raising with the 1.25 hike in national insurance to pay for the NHS. And it's sitting there in the books already without one rise in taxes.
I know, and the chief executive of BP actually said they had more money than they know what to do with. Well, I think we've got a clear idea of what to do with it. You know, if there is money there from a windfall tax, then I think the people who've got least should get a bit more help.
I heard your leader, Sir Keir, on the television this morning say that the cost of living crisis is the key challenge for politicians, and indeed he mentioned it when he launched your party's campaign for the May local elections. But is your claim of a one-off tax on the oil giants really going to solve the energy problems for more than a year?
Well, it's not going to solve it long-term or completely, because the problem is a long-standing one, and we need to get more energy from our own resources, so we're not dependent on countries like Russia, and we need to insulate our homes, and that's a long-term project. But right now, it could raise enough money to help everybody with an extra £200 and to help £600 to those families who are really the most struggling, and there will be bits of money to do more home insulation. So no, it won't solve everything, but it will go some way to helping people right now.
You know the classic argument against that as well, and you mentioned about the need to have alternatives so that we have what's called energy security. We talked about it on the programme yesterday. If you take those profits away from those companies like BP and Shell and the rest of them, then they've got the perfect excuse for not investing in alternatives, not chipping into the cost of a next generation of nuclear power stations, not helping build more wind farms.
Well, what we're asking is that because of the huge increase in the amount of money they're getting for the sale of their energy, that unanticipated extra be used in a windfall tax. But there'll still be very wealthy companies doing very well. And perhaps we're saying to the shareholders, well, maybe now's the time to take a bit less and give it to the people who are really struggling.
Final quick one, because I've been told we've got to move on. We're going to be naughty and risk being told off afterwards. I feel very strongly, as you know, about the voluntary sector, who do fantastic work in this territory. Are you in Labour, and are they in the Conservative Party and the Lib Dems doing enough to support the amazing work that so many people in the voluntary sector are doing?
I think they are a sector that is being currently inundated.
Yeah.
You know, people will be contacting them because of getting huge bills they can't meet, negotiating on the behalf of people to try and find ways to pay it back. So I think they're going to be experience unprecedented demand, and we need to be there to help them.
So you and Mel Stride, the chair of your committee, have a quiet little word and say, let's come up with a quick Treasury Select Committee report on what we can do to help the voluntary sector.
That's a top tip, and I'll certainly take it on board.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in and joining me live on the programme.
Thank you very much, Alistair.
Siobhan McDonough there, Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, but as I said at the very beginning, much more importantly, and that last answer underlines it, a member of the Treasury Select Committee. And the Select Committees are where real work is done, holding ministers to task. This is On the Money with me, Alistair Stewart. Coming up, today's Money Talks is, as I said a moment ago, with Professor Michael Jacobs. Michael's a former economic advisor to the Labour Cabinet, and he'll be giving his take on this government's handling of the cost of living crisis. That's in just a moment. Plus, we're answering more of your questions. But first, it's the GB News with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Alistair. It's 1:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance as well as other bills. At least 13 people have now been arrested as the group Just Stop Oil continues to hold protests across England. Specialist police officers were called to remove environmental activists blocking oil terminals. The group says around 10 sites have been obstructed by hundreds of protesters. They're calling on the government to stop funding new oil licenses. The mayor of Kiev says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko is also warning those wishing to return to Kiev to wait. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. But it says the capital and Chernihiv have been subjected to continued missile strikes despite Russian claims of reduced activity. The Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Earlier, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said some progress had been made at peace talks. President Zelensky's office confirmed further negotiations are continuing today. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today. That as another record number of people in the UK have had COVID. At the end of last week, an estimated 4.9 million people had it, up from 4.3 million the week before, according to Office for National Statistics figures. Those considered to be high risk and some NHS and social care staff will still be eligible for free tests. TV Online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. On the Money with Alistair Stewart. We'll be right back to help you beat the squeeze.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Money with me, Alistair Stewart. We're going to have to send out an order for more printing paper because you have been hitting the GB News emails and tweets left, right and centre. So we'll be doing some more of those, your points, right towards the end of the programme. But first, as you well know, today most households in Britain will see their energy bills rise by 54%, and that's almost £700, just under £2,000 a year. It's the biggest increase in living memory. Many have already felt financial pressure. A Yorkshire food bank is reporting that there's been a dramatic rise in pensioners using their services, as well as people who have never used a food bank before. Our reporter Anna Riley has the story.
75-year-old pensioner George Ford already owes more than £1,400 to his energy company and fears that the April price hike will bring him to an early grave. The Army veteran's already making the tough decision of whether to heat his home or eat a meal, and says he's lost 2 stone within a month because he can't afford to put food on the table.
Now I sit here till about 10 o'clock. with no light on, and I make a flask of coffee or tea to last me all the time, so that I'm not using it so much. But my bills never seem to go down. Can't afford it, and I know that with the things I suffer, COPD, heart trouble, I've got no feelings in my hands or my legs. I don't think I'm going to be alive for Christmas because I won't be able to keep myself warm. And I feel sorry for a lot of pensioners that's out here. It's going to whip them very much, and I will be honest, it's going to hit the food banks more.
To keep warm, George wraps up in a coat, hat, gloves and scarf. Even though he volunteers at a food bank, George is very reluctant to receive help from there.
I won't take anything from the food bank because there's family that need it, children that need it more than I do. I'll be honest, I just feel like dying.
George volunteers at the Beanie Street Food Bank, which helps up to 350 people a week. Founder of the organisation, Robbie Keane, says they've recently seen a dramatic increase in the number of pensioners and working people using its services, as well as first-time food bank users.
We are seeing an awful increase in pensioners and pensioners, very worried, as opposed to people on universal credits and stuff. It's pensioners, I suppose it's universal pension. I think they would be on, but they're very, very worried and scared, especially cost of electric. Cost of food even going up itself in supermarkets and stuff. It's quite scary. And we support an awful lot of people within work poverty, and that seems to be creeping up as well big time over the last, say, 2 to 3 weeks. We have seen a number of increases in people coming that have never used the food bank before. I would suggest that it's definitely up by 30 to 50% up in around that bracket.
Today's energy price increase is only the start of gas and electric bills increasing. With prices expected to go up again in 6 months' time, community support from food banks like this is more important than ever. Anna Riley, GB News, Hull.
Terrific and fascinating stuff there from Anna there for GB News. Powerful piece. We're going to bring back our panellists, and they're here with me. Jasmine Birtle sitting right next to me, and Greg Marsh from Now Stock Co. I've got a viewer call message for you in just a moment. But first of all, we were both sitting watching that, and it's difficult not to be moved by those who find themselves having to go to a food bank. And I said to you, which is a bit brutal, is there means testing? How do they check that they're entitled and genuinely in need to be there? Because a lot of people looking at that are going to be thinking that.
Well, generally you need to be referred either by a charity or by social services, doctor maybe. So on the whole, you would sort of go through a kind of a means testing, I guess, in that sense. And in fact, it generally has to be 3 times. If it's more than 3 times, then they have to sit down with you and work out what the situation is.
And is the reference thing the other way as well? So they might go back to the GP and say, look, I think Mr. and Mrs. Higgins have got a really profound problem here that maybe needs more than just a food bank.
Well, they may do, and you would hope so, frankly.
Yeah, good. OK. I'm glad to have cleared that one up. Let us go to... Can we put up Tracy's question? And Tracy, we were talking about getting in touch with the energy companies and making sure you knew what your rights were and the rest of it. This is a cracker from Tracy. I'm reading that utility companies are also charging more for the rental of their meters, not least smart meters, when this has nothing to do with the costs of energy. My question is, can I legally buy and have properly installed my own meter, thereby getting rid of my company's meter and saving a few bob there, question mark? I mean, the other thing that a number of people have also emailed in is about the fixed charges going up. For what?
For what indeed? And they've increased enormously. So in case you haven't been counting the pennies, it's moved for electricity, the standing charge, that's the daily charge you have to pay, even if you don't use any electricity at all, has gone from about 25p to about 45p a day. And those numbers make it sound like a small increase. 20p a day, there are 365 of those in a year. So actually, even if you use none of this, that's still £70 a year. So this is a really significant increase. I don't think, unfortunately, you can literally take the meter out of your property. You could disconnect yourself from the grid. That's about the only thing you could do to save that standing charge. But taken together for the electricity and your gas supply, if you have gas to your property, I'm afraid that just the cost of having supply to your property without any use has gone up by about £150 a year.
I live in a farming community, and a lot of my farming friends have gone down the generator route, and they had to go through God knows how many hoops and jumps to make sure that they weren't breaking any of the rules by basically creating their own power. I'm thrilled to bits now to be joined also by Ian Henderson, who is the Managing Director at Boiler Plan. I've got a specific question for you in a moment, Ian, which is There's a story on page 19 of the Times today that says, and this is written by their environment editor, quotes, the lifetime cost of a heat pump is now the same as a gas boiler for the first time. Now, heat pumps are supposed to be one of the great breakthrough things that are cheaper in the long term and very, very good environmentally. I mean, that's the best bit of good news that you guys have had for a long time, isn't it?
Well, firstly, I think it's right to clarify that boiler plan are neither pro heat pump nor pro gas boiler. We're pro customer. And I've read the report from page 19 of the Times today that claims a heat pump can be purchased for under £10,000. Certainly, the reduction in VAT from 5% to 0 is welcomed by the industry, but it really is just a token gesture. If the government really want heat pumps to become to be adopted or more widely adopted by the public, they have to do more with levelling out the bias in energy prices. So the current levies on energy mean that electricity is 4 times more expensive to buy than gas, and a heat pump typically will be maybe 2.5 to 3 times more efficient than a gas boiler. But when you're buying energy at 4 times the price, it doesn't always, well, in most cases, it isn't any cheaper. Customers need to, we're here to advise, at Boiler Plan, we're here to advise customers on what's best for their home. And that may be a heat pump.
But you also have the added advantage. You also have the added advantage, Ian. And we were talking earlier on with Jasmine and with Greg here in the studio that there's a big chunky grant sitting there available in the Treasury. If I choose, as a tax-paying voter, to get rid of my oil-fired boiler and go down the road of a heat pump, I think it's about £5,000, isn't it?
It's a £5,000 voucher gone live today. It's called the Boiler Upgrade Grant. Customers, homeowners can access that. However, that we're seeing on quotes that we've put out into the marketplace, average prices of a heat pump installation with upgrades to the heating system, just for that heating bit, not the fabric first, not the improvements to the fabric or the insulation of a building. Heat pump installation of around £12,000. Now, if you take off that £5,000 grant, you're still at around £7,000 for the homeowner to pay against a gas boiler at about £2,500. And when the heat pump isn't that much more or cheaper to run, then it's really difficult to make a kind of viable case. However, if the government really want that adoption, they've got to start working with the energy companies, reducing the levies on electricity for heat pump owners. So even if that was just maybe 6 in the morning till 8, and then 4 o'clock till 10 in the evening, if you've got a heat pump, you can buy electricity for 2 times the price of gas. Then you'll see mass adoption of heat pumps.
Sure. I look forward to your letter to the editor of the Times tomorrow morning, which I'm sure they will publish in precise detail. He's got a point. It takes you right back to what you both said at the very beginning. It's essentially the unit cost of energy. It's not grants that may be available or this, that and the other. That's the real crisis, whether it's Biden releasing more oil or Putin bullying the Germans over using rubles rather than euros.
Yeah.
No government can sort that out.
The best news for me in the spring statement wasn't anything that was announced in the spring statement. It was that there's probably dry powder remaining. Unfortunately, even with that dry powder, I don't think any of us can realistically expect the government to do more than help a little bit.
Just got one in that I want to take straight away because it's a really important one, and I referred to it in my lead-in. It's from Jordan. Have we got that one? Excellent. Jordan simply says, I wasn't able to submit my meter reading yesterday. Is there still time? Brackets, has he got a problem?
Well, essentially, if he could at least take a photograph of the meter read.
Are you paying attention, Jordan? This is an important bit.
Yes, just have a photograph so that he can show what it was. Because the point of doing the meter reading is to just show, make sure that the gas and electricity companies charge
It's to freeze an economic moment in time.
It is, yes, certainly for the last month or so, because the new price starts today.
Yeah.
So you're showing, look, this is how much I've had up until yesterday. You should charge me on the lower rate for that part.
Anything to add, or are you happy with that?
No, that's exactly right. And actually, we've had several CEOs, including Greg Jackson, confirm that they will honour submissions over the next few days. So I think if you do it today, do it over the weekend, do it on Monday, you should be fine.
Hope that answers your question, Jordan. Thanks for submitting it, a brilliant one. Very quick one to end on. I want to go back to Ian, if I may. When I was researching you before this conversation, Ian, I gather that you also train young men and women who want to become boiler fitters and work in the industry. How's that going? Is demand up?
We have a fundamental problem in the UK. We don't have enough engineers to install heat pumps. There's only around about 1,200 actually qualify. So we own a training centre in Yorkshire, National Gas Centre for Excellence, and we've just set up a dedicated heat pump training centre. And we launched the first course on April the 20th. It's already full. So there is a definite want in the industry to retrain. I think we just need to fix a few problems with energy prices. The education to the public is so important on what a heat pump does, how much it costs to run. And also our industry needs educated as well. And that's what we're trying to do. Educate customers, educate the industry. And then, let's try and work towards a clear path to decarbonising the UK housing stock, because we don't have one right now.
Ian Henderson, great to talk to you and lovely to meet you down the line. Thank you very much indeed. That's Ian Henderson, Managing Director at Boiler Plan, which sells, repairs and installs, maintains and protects boilers. Final point to both of you, fairly briefly, that's actually at the pounding heart of the whole thing. We need to educate ourselves more, either via Nous or via Magpie or any of the other sites. But we also need a vibrant economy with young people who are prepared to work, get a job, take training from people like him and get UK PLC going again.
I agree. Yeah, we do. Unfortunately, even with government help, if there's one thing to take from this conversation, we are going to have, all of us, to take real evasive steps. We're going to have to look for additional sources of income. We might have to square up for some very tough conversations with our existing employers. Yeah. We're going to have to take evasive steps about deferring expenditure, around cutting consumption, and about economising. This is not good news. It's going to be a very tough year, particularly for UK households at the lower end of the income spectrum and for people who are busy and time poor and anxious. All I can say is
final briefest thought.
Well, I agree, and it is particularly, I think, now making money. Like Martin, Martin Lewis has said, there is only so much you can do to save money, and now I think it's making money happily. And I'll blow my own trumpet here. We have hundreds of ways that people can make money on the side, and I think this is the next thing now for this year.
Totally agree. I was at a book launch last night for a company that's called 8 Billion Ideas.
Excellent.
So there you go. There's no limit to it. Jasmine and Greg, and also Ian a little earlier. Thanks. So helpful, user-friendly. Anytime, you're very welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as promised earlier on, it is time now for On the Money's daily interview series, Money Talks. Our guest today is Michael Jacobs, Professorial Fellow at the Sheffield Political Economy Research Institute at Sheffield University. Prior to joining SPERI, Michael was director of the IPPR Commission on Economic Justice, based at the UK think tank, the Institute for Public Policy Research. But from 2004 to 2007, he was also a member of the Council of Economic Advisers at the UK Treasury. And until 2010, Michael was a special advisor to the then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, with responsibility for, energy, also environment and climate policy. Since leaving government, Michael's continued to stay in close touch with leading parliamentarians and remains a highly influential figure within Labour's policy-making circles as the party formulates its proposals to challenge this government and offer you policies were it to form its own government. So, earlier this week, Liam sat down with Professor Michael Jacobs as our latest guest on Money Talks.
Michael, you've been involved in Labour policy-making circles for many, many years. You're a modest man, but you are still highly influential within the Labour Party. What kind of opportunity do you think Labour has got now to really put forward policies, particularly on the economy, that can appeal to the electorate?
Labour is trying to win a majority of votes. That's its purpose. It wants to win the next election. And so it's always looking for where the majority of public opinion is. And I think the interesting thing about this moment is people realise something has gone wrong with the economy. We know that much of this has come from outside. The energy prices were not caused inside the British economy. But the reason that high energy prices and now high food prices, inflation in general, is such a problem is that incomes are too low. We call this a cost of living crisis, but you could equally think of it as a cost of incomes crisis. Incomes now for many people are very low. People in work, we have a minimum wage, which is not enough now for most people who are on it to live on, particularly if they've got children. And we have a benefit system which is not enough to live on. Now, some of that is about the generosity of the welfare system, which is really in the government's control directly, but some of it is about a labour market which simply doesn't pay enough to workers. And workers now, most of whom are not in unions anymore, as they were when we last had inflation of this kind in the 1970s, unions help push wages up. We don't have that mechanism for most workers now. And so we have a problem, in a sense, in the way our economy is structured. And that's, I think, the issue that most people now will be thinking, that's what we need to get a grip of.
You and I are just about old enough to remember the winter of discontent, the big dogfight between capital and labour in the 70s and the early 80s. It was, when we sort of came of age as young people following the news and so on. We've talked about it in the past. Is it really the case that we might not see a lot of industrial action going forward? Yes, only a quarter of people are in trade unions, but they're overwhelmingly public sector unions. They provide vital services. Those unions are strong. Some would say they're becoming increasingly militant. And of course, there's a big union battle at P&O now, which is a private sector company. So we could see that wage inflation, price inflation, that wage price spiral that we saw in the 70s, which saw inflation go deep into double digits.
I think we're well off any kind of wage price inflationary spiral because there aren't enough pressures in the labour market. It is interesting that the P&O issue has suddenly reminded people that trade unions are rather useful and the minimum wage is rather useful. We've now seen apparently a lot of those new workers not being employed even on our minimum wage. And you can see there where people are beginning to think, well, maybe it would be useful to be in unions. You're quite right that most of the economy that is unionised now is the public sector. And I think the first thing we'll see in this is a bit of resistance on the public sector, because of course that's in the government's control. Lots and lots of workers who are in the public sector are going to see wage increases well below the level of inflation, and I think their unions will kick up a fuss, and I think you could see some industrial action. The problem is, in terms of wages, that the rest of the economy, the 3/4 of workers who are not in unions, do not have that bargaining power, and of course lots of them are now on very insecure contracts. If you're on a 0 hours contract, and if you're not actually an employee at all, but you're a self-employed contractor, even though you only have one client, and so you really should be employed, you have very little bargaining power. I don't think most of those Deliveroo workers we see on our streets are about to go on strike. So this will become a problem, I think, for them as they realise that they are not able to push their wages up. And this, I think, is a structural issue in the economy. Now, I don't think we're going to see under a Conservative government very much movement on this, but I think it would be interesting to see how Labour play this. Labour do plan to make 0 hours contracts much more difficult. They do plan to give workers more rights from day one and not just after 1 or 2 years. And they would like to see more collective bargaining, more union representation and so on. So I think that's an interesting area. And I think the Conservatives will be vulnerable because they have very, very little to say to people who are on those low incomes and those insecure contracts.
Now, I want this interview to focus on the future. You have advised Labour Prime Ministers, Labour Chancellors, both in office and at shadow cabinet level. But let's just think back to the spring statement for a moment. The two big numbers that jumped out at me, speaking to your point, Michael Jacobs, is the 3.1%, which is the benefit upgrade at a time when the 7.4% inflation number is now, that's the official estimate. So clearly the benefits are going to lag the increase in the cost of living by a considerable margin. And then it's that 7.4 number itself for inflation. If you've got 5.7 million public sector workers, which we have, and they're not getting, a lot of them, a pay rise, that is 7.4%, they're losing money too. So both those realities, benefits lagging inflation, public sector pay lagging inflation, that's going to upend politics, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think Rishi Sunak and, of course, Boris Johnson and the rest of the cabinet who approved that spring statement.
Do you think they get that?
I don't think they do get it. I think it's very hard if you earn as much money as these people do. You know, we know Rishi Sunak is a millionaire personally. We know Boris Johnson has been trying to borrow money from lots of donors because he doesn't feel he can live on the 150,000 or so that he gets as Prime Minister. I think they do find it difficult to understand what it's like to be on £15,000 a year, where literally you are looking at your income every week and saying, I don't think I can afford to heat my home. I'm going to have to put the heating off. Or I can't feed myself and my children, so my children get a meal and I don't. And there are a lot of people, there are 19 million people in this country who are on universal credit, disability benefit, sickness benefit, and the basic pension and pension credit, which is the lowest level of pension. So there's a lot of people who are really going to struggle. And when this month energy bills rise by 50%, and of course, people in work are going to see national insurance rise, although not for the lowest income earners that we thought was going to happen. But anybody paying income tax is now going to see a rise in their national insurance. VAT is going to go up. So if you try and go out, you'll find VAT on your entertainment is going up. All of those things, I think, will make it really hard for lots of people. And I don't think any MP who has a constituency and who is going to constituency surgeries and talking to people in their constituencies will be unable to see this. So I think there will be huge pressure on the government this summer and autumn, running up to the next budget, which will be, we presume, in kind of October, November.
Fascinating from Michael Jacobs there with Liam. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining me. Liam will be here on Monday and I'll be over there on Sunday from 12 o'clock and Saturday too. Join me then. Bye-bye for now.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground